Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Binyamin, Tjong-Alvares, and as we start 2015, we take a look back at some of the last year's most imperative figures in the global economy. We're joined in the studio by Eytan Avriel, co-founder and chief editor of Israeli financial newspaper TheMarker, and Sam Chester, analyst at investment management firm Clarity Capital. Thanks for joining us. Before we start our discussion, we're going to watch a report about a man who started as an English teacher and whose vision and impeccable timing allowed him to stage the biggest IPO in history to date and become Asia's richest man.
Jack Ma, a former English teacher, founded the massive e-commerce company Alibaba in 1999 with just $60,000 and an apartment. The company started with a few dozen items for sale, but this year broke records with their $25 billion initial public offering. Ma recently made headlines by suggesting that his massive wealth was alienating more than it was helpful, and though his company listed in the United States, he reminded onlookers that it was not without regret.
Some people have said that Hong Kong lost the opportunity to have Alibaba. I personally feel that Alibaba missed out on Hong Kong. It's regrettable. Maybe it was the wrong timing, or that we didn't prepare well enough, or there were limitations in communication. But we still love and support Hong Kong.
Jack Ma is perhaps the face of China's new generation of billionaires, including Alibaba co-founder Joseph Tsai and telecom tycoon Wang Jing. Their rise is marking the growth of a new 1%, and it's just another illustration of China's swift ascent.
Mr. Chester. So, Jack Ma has been seen as the symbol of Chinese entrepreneurism, but how typical is he as a Chinese entrepreneur?
Well, first I would say for Western audiences who Alibaba as a whole is somewhat foreign, you have to understand that Jack Ma is the Steve Jobs. He's the Mark Zuckerberg of China, and I think there's several ways that he really stands out in both standing out within China and also being representative. The first way is he really has a rags to riches story. He came from nothing, and he's pioneered this tremendously successful company. And when you look at the people who are running China, the princelings, the sons of wealth, the sons of connections, there's a strong contrast. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that Alibaba and the other ventures that Jack Ma has pioneered, they're really, truly innovative. They're really that entrepreneurial spirit that China's pushing for, unlike many other companies you see in China. And the final thing I would just touch on briefly is, just in terms of the IPO, Jack Ma is really leading Alibaba to cross over between the traditional Chinese internet domain and the Western internet space, and to really find bridges between the two of them, which is something that I think we're going to see more of in the next year and the next years ahead.
On that note, actually, in terms of the internet, China still is very, very much controlling of foreign influences, certainly by way of the internet. How likely is it that China will be a big player in the world internet, in the global internet?
It is a big player. It's a huge player, and will be even much bigger than that, just because they have population which is several times what you have in Europe, in the United States. So yeah, Jack Ma actually symbolizes the growth of the internet worldwide, specifically in China, and even more specifically the growth of I'd say the middle class and upper middle class of China, who are the people that are buying all the product that you get in an e-commerce site like Alibaba. So it signifies basically two things: the growth of e-commerce in China, and then obviously what you just referred to, the fact that the Chinese entrepreneurs and businessmen are basically taking all over the world in some places, and they're buying companies, and obviously they're projected to be much more significant a year and a decade from now.
Okay, well, Mr. Chester, would you say that Jack Ma really actually is the face of the new China, the rags to riches story, or is he just an anomaly?
I think he is. I think a lot of people in China look to him as a role model, unlike anything else. The final point I would add is that Jack Ma actually last year retired as the active CEO of Alibaba, and he did something very Bill Gates-esque. He said he was shifting his goals to focus not only on business, but also on environmental concerns, educational concerns. That's something that represents this new China, a rising middle class that is looking beyond simply their pocketbook and also at environmental and other social concerns. And Jack Ma's reorientation and focus on that is in that sense very representative.
Okay, we're going to focus our discussion now across the ocean and the U.S., where despite economic and financial struggles worldwide, the economy has fared exceptionally well. And Janet Yellen, the U.S. Federal Reserve's first female leader, gracefully ended America's biggest emergency economic stimulus in history while keeping investors in tow.
Early in 2014, Janet Yellen became the first woman to head the United States Federal Reserve, taking the reins from Ben Bernanke and largely continuing the Fed's quantitative easing policy, ensuring that money was flowing into the system, as well as keeping interest rates very low. There is debate about whether any of this money is making it to consumers and borrowers or not, given that the wealth gap continues to grow. Still, there are a number of factors that have led to positive talk on economic activity in the U.S., perhaps the biggest of which is the decline of oil prices.
The judgment of the committee is that from the standpoint of the United States and the U.S. outlook, that the decline we've seen in oil prices is likely to be on net a positive. It's something that's certainly good for families, for households. It's putting more money in their pockets.
Now, the big question for 2015, with a more positive economic outlook, is when Federal Reserve Chair Yellen will raise interest rates and reverse QE policy.
Mr. Avriel.
Yeah.
So Janet Yellen's main success, I would say, is really in keeping interest rates low and essentially keeping stability in the markets, nevertheless. I mean, would you say, however, that she was very much in charge of what we saw, you know, the taper basically? Is that really her baby?
Yeah, she's very confident. Well, first of all, if you ask, a lot of people will tell you that the chairman of the Federal Reserve is the most important person in the world. He sets the interest rates in the United States, and usually
he or she, right?
She in this case now, and then most other countries somehow follow on this trend. Now, what she has been trying to do is tell everybody that she will be raising rate sometime soon, sometime this year, maybe next year, and trying to understand the reaction from the market. Mm-hmm. If she will see that the markets are acting normally, that you don't see any repeat of the taper tantrum that you refer to, any other, I don't know, wild variation and volatility in the market, then she will actually do that, and we will see a new trend. That's the first time since 2008, in fact, of interest rate rising all over the place. So she's trying to do this, but she's trying to do this very slowly, very carefully. She's really afraid to spook the market in any way, because before that, it's been shown that basically the markets were the ones who led the world, the situation, basically prompted the Federal Reserve to act, not the other way around.
Right. What would you say are the main challenges lying ahead for Janet Yellen?
Well, anything that's happening now, all the bad thing that you see around the world, you see the oil dropping very fast. That could have difficulties for some market. You see problems in Russia. Any flares, any disruption in normal life is a danger for her in trying to regain and go back to a sort of more normal world with higher growth and inflation that's sort of picking up.
Yeah, but the U.S. is on a good track. I mean,
well, so what I would add is that what we've mostly seen from Janet Yellen over the past year has been maintaining a lot of the policies of her predecessor, of Ben Bernanke. And I think if you have to understand who are they, where are they coming from, Ben Bernanke was fundamentally a specialist in crisis response. That's what he had studied for many years, and that's what he had a chance to implement. And Janet Yellen, her focus has been on labor and employment issues as a scholar in the past. I think those are some of the issues that she's been speaking about recently and that she's hoping to address in 2015.
Okay. Well, we're going to, on the topic of crisis, we're going to go to Russia. 2014 was an especially turbulent year for Russia, as sanctions coincided with a steep drop in the price of oil, the lifeblood of Russia's economy. But despite the economy entering a recession, Vladimir Putin remains the undisputed, unpredictable, and unaccountable head of this energy-rich, nuclear-tipped state, and is by no means weak.
Russia has had a challenging year, to say the least. The decline of oil prices and Western sanctions have hit the Russian economy, and the impacts are being felt from bottom to top. Despite economic blow after blow, Russian President Vladimir Putin has had his public chin up. Though his image as a stabilizing leader remains solid, protests against him continue to grow. The Russian economy is centered heavily on oil and natural gas. About 50% of their budget revenue relies on it. And with oil trading at about half its 2014 peak, Putin must look at diversifying Russia's economy.
We have uneasy tasks in front of us, and maybe we will have to go through an uneasy stage of our development. It is also clear that we can do this. And we can also, as we usually say, use the situation to solve the main task that is in front of our economy in the last 15-20 years. That is the task to diversify it.
From the Winter Olympics to the Ukraine crisis and rising homophobia to the ruble's collapse, Russia has been hit hard in 2014, and Putin with it.
Mr. Avriel, how long would you say Putin can hold out against the West considering the sanctions?
A very long time. Most leaders will do what any rational group of people will think through and take a decision. In this case, of Mr. Putin's case, you don't know what he will do. It's all in his head. He's very popular in Russia. He has over 70% of confidence vote from the public, and he really believes that he's this man trying to protect Russia from the West. Trying to bring it to his knees or something like that.
Even as people are suffering, even as the economy is faltering.
Even as people are suffering.
56.56.
He's Russian. He's from the KGB. The Russian people have known hardship in the fact he thinks that they can endure that. And my opinion is that he can go quite a long way, even to the point of, I don't want to call it a war, but some kind of military confrontation on some front somewhere. He's really not afraid to go all the way.
Now, given the current power struggle, I mean, will we see a mending of relations with the West under Putin, or do you think there's going to be a permanent shift in alliances?
So I would actually maybe push back at some of the comments that were just said in terms of Putin. I think that people like to say, "Oh, it's the Cold War again. We're going back to the 1970s." I think what people don't understand sometimes is that Russia's economy is structured differently than it was 20, 30 years ago. To the extent that it's an oil producer and dependent upon its oil income, is something that you just didn't see in the past. And as a result, while I agree that Putin is in a position of great strength, his dependency upon, for instance, OPEC and the Saudi oil minister refusing to cut production and raise the price of oil, that's a weakness that Putin doesn't have control over. He doesn't have control over that like the Russian, Soviet Union leaders of the past. And that's a critical weakness I don't think Putin saw coming. No one really saw the tremendous drop in oil prices that we've seen over the last 6 months happen.
Putin is not a politician that is going to be up for vote in the next 6 months, and he has to put all of this into consideration. As far as he is concerned, the West meddling in his own backyard in Ukraine, which according to his mind is his territory, his backyard, his place. They are Russian there. You see, it as an affront to Russia. It's not really economic. It's not even political. It's almost a sort of sentimental and I don't know, imperialistic view on life. Obviously, he's very bothered by the price of oil, but I don't see that changing any of his policies.
Oh, I agree with you. I'm just saying to take this in the direction of the economic consequences for Putin. Putin will remain in power. No one's going to vote him out, particularly without an election. That said, Russia destabilizing, going to a deep recession, which the Russian economist, minister, and Putin have already admitted is likely on the table for 2015, that will very much undermine his credibility. So will he stay in power? Will he still antagonistic to the West? Yes. But will he be losing the reins of the Russian economy? Very much so. In a way that, you didn't see in the traditional antagonism between the West and Russia.
Of course, there's not really a contender to, his seat, is there? I mean, there's not really much of another option for the Russian people.
The younger liberal faces that have emerged over the last year or so, the most famous of which was just sentenced to several months in jail just recently. And Putin has shown no reluctance no fear of taking anyone he sees as a threat and putting them into some sort of position where they can't threaten him at all.
If I had to bet for 2015, at some point there will be some kind of problem somewhere in the world, maybe the Middle East, maybe some other places. Just from the nervousness, price of oil might recover a little bit, and then you'll see all of this calming down. And I don't see anybody challenging Putin to do what he thinks he wants to do on the place. nobody in Europe or in the United States is actually going to place boots on the ground and go and defy him on the actual ground.
Right. Well, we've talked about now, our picks for figures of the year in our New Year special. I mean, Mr. Chester, who would you say is your pick for Person of the Year?
Person of the Year in an economic sense,
yeah.
I was very much struck by this drop in oil prices. Oil prices have fallen from about $115 a barrel to under $60. That's below the red line of almost every single oil-producing, oil exporter country. They're feeling the pinch. Russia, obviously, Iran, Venezuela, and the countries in the Middle East. And who's behind this? Who's really pushing it? Saudi Arabia, particularly their oil minister, Ali al-Naimi. I think that the Saudis' determination, for whatever reasons, which perhaps we won't have time to get into, to cut the price of oil to hold on to their market share, that's remarkable. That is transforming the oil industry in a way that we haven't seen for 40 years.
Okay, well, Sam Chester from Clarity Capital, thanks for joining us. Eytan Avriel from TheMarker, thank you for joining us. That is our economy magazine for the day, the New Year's special. I'm Binyamin Tjong-Alvares. Follow me on Twitter at Tjong-Alvares. Send us your comments and join us again tomorrow.